All right, so let's do a little work on our workbench. So our workbench model is to build a workbench out of some 1-inch tubing and some thin plate. And we have some default dimensions on different sizes. I'm going to start with a very basic workbench design that we can then model. Whenever I create something like this, just like our lanterns, I want to start with a proto sketch of the general dimensions of my workbench. So let's start with that. I'm going to create a sketch here in the top plane. And I can use N for normal and P for plane to turn off the planes. Now I've got a nice place to work from. I'm going to create a rectangle here. Before I do that though, let me check my units. I want to go in and check my workspace units. Yeah, I want to work in inches for this, because if you notice here, all of my dimensions for my drawings here are in inches and feet, so that makes it a little easier if I start with that. And I'm going to start with my rectangle now. I'm going to go back and create that sketch one more time in that top plane. I can turn off P for plane. I'm going to grab a corner rectangle. I'm going to drag it out. And then the nice thing about this is if I've got this, I'm going to put in some dimensions. I'm going to type in 48 and let's do 30. That tends to be a good workbench width. We can always go back and change these dimensions to match later. I'm going to hit escape to get out of the dimension tool. I'm going to drag these a little bit out of the way of the rectangle tool. And then I'm happy with that sketch. I'm going to rename this. This will be our base sketch, because this will be the bottom of our bench, and we'll extrude it upwards. So I'll go to a corner sketch, extrude this up to create our prototype. Boom. Let's do a workbench height of about 30. And I'll rename this part. Let's call this workbench proto shape. Remember that a proto shape is just kind of a stand-in for the outside dimensions of our shape here. And I'll do one more sketch to create the top. Let's grab the top here. There's my, and for that top, I'm going to use the top of our proto bench, and I'm going to go up from there. Let's do a use command to add these edges to our sketch. Now I can turn off the workbench proto. Here's the bit that I created. I want to offset this a little bit, or even just use a center point rectangle. Let's do a center point rectangle here, because I think the dimensions for this are defined by the drawings. Yeah, so A and E are defined by the drawings. So I want to use a center point rectangle from the middle of this. So I'll grab center point rectangle. I'll kind of mouse over the middle here, mouse over the middle here. And if I kind of go in the middle here, boom, there's the middle of my shape. I can drag out. And let's go to the top here and decide what our general size is. So for this one, maybe let's try 60. That looks pretty good. And then let's do 48. Now I can always go back in later and update these dimensions to match what is in here. But for now, I just want to get some shapes drawn, and then I can go back and edit dimensions and get it precise later. This one, I'm going to make a construction line to make this extrusion a little easier. Now when I select, I still have to select both. Boo. Sometimes it has a little trouble with that use command. It'll keep that as a hard edge, but we can make this work. All right, I'm going to call this top surface sketch. Let's just call it top sketch. And I'll use this to extrude the top of my workbench. Go to a corner view here, and let's extrude this. I'm going to grab these areas here. I'm going to extrude it up. If I made this out of 1-inch material, that would be a very, very heavy bench. So let's do 1/4 inch. And there's the top of my workbench. Top of workbench. So at this point, you should have a proto bottom. Let me turn that back on, and a top. And now we can start adding. We want to add in our supports. All of the structure of this is going to be made out of 1-inch tubing. Now the 1-inch tubing is a file that came from McMaster-Carr. So you can see here's the model here. I've actually put the file in here because I had a lot of students ask about this, because if you go in here, there's actually several links that you can choose from. But the link doesn't matter. We just want the cross section of that tube. So I'm gonna hit download to download this .setp file, the step file, put it in my downloads folder. And then in that workbench model, I'm gonna add this object. I'm gonna insert a new element. I'm gonna import, and I'm gonna go find that file and add it to this document. I want to import it to the document. In this case, it doesn't really matter which one you pick because there's only one tube. I'm going to call this, I'm going to rename this because I'm very creative, just tube, because I don't need all of these part numbers. I could save them for later if I was going to order this from McMaster-Carr, but I'm just going to say 1-inch tube here. Rename and hit 1-inch tube. All right, so this 1-inch tube is going to be kind of our master tube. We're going to use this to create all of the other tubes in our part studio. Now, I like to only create unique parts here. So I'm going to think about how I want to build this bench. Let's take a look at how this bench is constructed. If you look at the sides, you'll notice that the verticals go fully from the bottom all the way to the top. So let's do a vertical first. Let's add one of those verticals. So in here, I'm gonna create a copy of this that I'm gonna then manipulate. So one way, if you just want to steal geometry from another piece and create a brand new part that you're gonna then edit, is to use the derive function. So I'm gonna hit derive now. It's gonna ask me, where do I want to steal geometry from? I'm going to steal that 1-inch tube. And I'm going to hit the green checkbox when I'm happy with that. And this part is a brand new part. It exists on its own. It doesn't have anything in common with, it just has the geometry from the other piece. It exists on its own, and it comes in with the same name, but it is a very different part. So in this case, I'm going to take this and I'm going to use this now to help me build my bench. And at this point, we're going to be kind of bouncing back and forth between the assembly tab and the part studio tab. So I'm going to actually leave this as part studio and assembly because I think the names are helpful. So let's come into our assembly and add those parts that we've added to our part studio. So I'm going to hit insert. I'm going to grab the part studio. I'm going to grab the workbench proto. I'm going to grab the top of the workbench, and I'm going to grab that 1-inch tube. At this point, I'm going to start putting this in the right location. So I know this is the outside edge of my thing, of my bench. The piece that I want to do, oh, I forgot one detail. There's one bit that I'm missing here. I want to get this face. This face is going to help me. So I'm going to create this edge here. Now I said this was my outside edge. So when I extrude this way, I'm going to grab this edge here, and I'm basically going to be creating this piece of sheet metal here on the left edge. Now remember, this is my proto, so I want to go in, because this is the outside dimension. So I'm going to go in for this. So it's going to default to go out. I want to flip it around and go in, and I'll make this 1/4 inch is really thick for this. So I'm just going to do 1/8 of an inch. I think that's a good size here, and I'm going to say accept. I'm going to call this part 4 that's created. I'm going to rename that. This is a side sheet metal. Leave that as so. So when we can now turn off the Workbench Proto, you'll see the side sheet metal is there. And we're going to use that to help us locate where this 1-inch tube is going to go in my assembly. So adding that to our piece, we're going to come in here and add that side sheet metal. Hit OK. So I can turn off the Workbench Proto, and you can see there's my sheet metal. At this point, I like to group some things so they don't move around relative to each other. So I'm going to grab the Workbench Proto. I'm going to fix this in space. If I right click on here, for some reason it's stuck in move mode. I can also right click over here, and I'm just going to hit it fix. So now this is fixed in space. I can't drag it around. I'm also going to lock in this and this and this, these three things, the Workbench Proto, the top of the workbench, and the sheet metal. And I'm going to group these together. So these are all locked into each other. So notice all of these parts are locked in. I'm going to turn off the Proto. I'm no longer need it. I'm going to use this now to create my tube. Now my tube is going to go on the inside edge, right? I want it to go about here. My first vertical is going to go about there, and that's where I'm going to lock it in. So let's do a fastened mate to get this in our position, get this into position. So going over here, I got that tube, the top of my tube. I'm going to turn off the top of my workbench visually so I can get this locked in a little bit easier. I'm going to use a fasten mate. I'm going to grab this top edge here, and I'm going to go to this top right corner here. And this will give me a good idea of where this is going to go. Now, you notice there's a bit of an issue. That's not exactly where I want it to go. I actually need a little bit of an offset. You can see I'm missing something here. I need a bit of an offset here to get this in the right location. At this point, it might make sense to do a little measuring. I can measure my tube from outside to outside. And the nice thing about 1-inch tube is the nominal dimension is actually 1. So you can get an idea of where this offset's going to go. So let's go to fasten one more time. You'll notice the axis here is red, the red one. So when we do this offset, we're going to offset this by 1/2 inch. And there we go. Now our tube is aligned. It's in the right location. But at this point, you're going, Albert, you're missing something really important here. What am I missing? Look at that. It's too short. How do I edit this? Well, I really want to edit it based on this, this assembly, not just editing it kind of in its own bit here, or editing without context. I want it to be based on this assembly. So I'm going to use the edit in context. So I'm going to grab this piece. I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to hit edit in context. And in that assembly, you'll see here's the assembly 1. And I'm going to use that to make a change, to change the length. And I'm going to do that by extruding this edge here. So I'm just going to extrude. I'm going to grab this edge. And because I want it to go all the way to the end, I could drag it down and try to get this all lined up and eyeball it. But there's another way to do this. I'm actually just going to go all the way to this edge here. So instead of doing a blind type, I'm going to go up to face and grab this face here. Right there. That is our vertical. And I'm going to hit the green checkbox to accept. In this context, I'm going to rename this as vertical leg. I'm also going to rename this 1-inch tube because now it's serving as a vertical leg. That's our shape. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to hit go back to my assembly. and there's my part. And I've got my vertical leg and it's been edited in context. I'm going to stop right there.